Think about what you ate this morning: toast, cereal, maybe a glass of juice. Perhaps nothing at all because you were not particularly hungry. Whatever it was, I want you to hold that image. Because by the end of this video, you may never look at your breakfast the same way again. There is a growing body of research, peer-reviewed, published in major journals, that connects what you eat in the first hour of your morning directly to your memory, your focus, and the long-term health of your brain. And the most common breakfast choices in people over 60, the toast, the cereal, the skipped meal, the orange juice, are quietly working against every one of those things. Today I want to walk you through exactly why, the mechanism, the evidence, and what to put on your plate instead. Not a complicated protocol, not a regime, a different breakfast, that is all. But the difference it makes to your brain over months and years is one of the most significant changes you can make, without a prescription, without a gym, without spending more money. Let me start with the breakfast most seniors eat: toast made from white or lightly refined bread. A bowl of processed cereal, the kind that comes in a box with a health claim on the front. A glass of orange juice, maybe a cup of tea or coffee. And I want to be fair, this breakfast is not a disaster. It is food, it provides calories. It gets you through the morning. But here is what it is doing to your brain by 10 in the morning. By 10, roughly 90 minutes after you finished eating, your brain is running on less fuel than it started the day with. And you can feel it, even if you have never had a word for it. Here is why. White bread has a glycemic index of roughly 70 to 75. Most processed breakfast cereals sit between 65 and 85. Orange juice, even the freshly squeezed kind, has a glycemic index of around 50. But a glycemic load that spikes blood sugar rapidly because you are drinking concentrated fruit sugar with no fiber to slow its absorption. Together, this breakfast sends your blood glucose sharply upward within 30 minutes of eating. Your pancreas responds with insulin. Blood glucose falls, sometimes rapidly. And by 10 in the morning, your blood glucose is lower than it was before you ate. Your brain runs almost entirely on glucose. It cannot store it. It cannot make it. It depends entirely on your blood delivering a steady, consistent stream. When that supply spikes and crashes every morning, the brain's access to fuel becomes unstable. A study published in Diabologia, a peer-reviewed metabolic medicine journal, examined adults aged 65 and over with type 2 diabetes. Those who consumed a high glycemic index breakfast performed significantly worse on verbal memory tests than those who ate a low glycemic index meal. And a meta-analysis reviewing the glycemic load evidence found that a high glycemic load breakfast may disrupt cognitive performance, particularly in the late morning. Exactly when most people notice their thinking becoming slower and less precise. I want to be honest with you about this evidence. The research on glycemic index and cognition has not been perfectly consistent. Some studies find strong effects, others find smaller ones. What is consistent is the mechanism and the direction. A breakfast that stabilizes blood glucose over 3 to 4 hours appears to support better cognitive performance during that window than one that spikes and crashes it. And over years, 365 mornings a year, that pattern matters enormously. But blood glucose is only the first part of the problem. The second part is what is missing from the plate entirely. What is missing is choline. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a doctor, a dietitian, a pharmacist, anyone in a clinical setting mention choline to you? Almost certainly not. Choline is the direct precursor to acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter your brain uses for memory, for learning, for the moment-to-moment communication between neurons that lets you recall a name, follow a conversation, remember where you put your keys. When choline intake is low, acetylcholine production falls. The communication network your brain depends on for memory begins to degrade. Now, how common is low choline intake? A major analysis of NAIN's data, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the largest ongoing nutritional survey in the United States, found that only 6.6% of adults aged 19 and over meet the recommended adequate intake for choline. 6.6%. That means roughly 93% of American adults are not consuming enough of the nutrient their brain uses to form and retrieve memories. And a separate peer-reviewed study examining Nain's cognitive test data found that choline intake in the adequate range was associated with approximately 50% lower risk of low cognitive function compared to those falling below the threshold. 50% from one nutrient that almost nobody is eating enough of. I had a patient once, a retired pharmacist of all people who had spent 30 years advising patients on their medications and had never once been advised about choline himself. He was 67. He described his memory as unreliable, not dramatically failing, just not as dependable as it used to be. He would start a sentence and occasionally lose the end of it. His diet was careful, low fat, plenty of vegetables, no eggs. He had avoided them for 20 years over cholesterol concerns. No liver, no shellfish. He had entirely inadvertently built a diet with almost no choline in it. When I explained what choline was and what it did, he went quiet for a moment and then said, "I have been advising people about nutrients their whole lives. Nobody ever told me about this one." The primary food source of choline is eggs. One egg contains approximately 150 milligrams of choline. Two eggs deliver between 50 and 70% of your daily recommended intake. And eggs also contain phospholipids, omega-3 fatty acids, tryptophan, vitamin B12, vitamin D, lutein, and zeaxanthin, every one of which plays a documented role in brain health and cognitive protection. A 2024 study from the Rush Memory and Aging Project, one of the most respected long-running cognitive research cohorts in the United States, found that frequent egg consumption was associated with better performance on verbal cognitive tests in older adults. A systematic review published in early 2025, examining study through February of that year, concluded that whole egg consumption, specifically the choline, tryptophan, and omega-3 content, influences neurotransmission, neurogenesis, and brain function in ways consistent with cognitive protection. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You have spent years being told that eggs raise your cholesterol, that the breakfast you should be eating is low fat, high fiber, whole grain. I understand why that guidance felt credible. It came from doctors. It came from official sources. It was repeated for 30 years. But dietary guidance on eggs has shifted substantially in the last decade. The American Heart Association updated its position to allow 1 to 2 eggs per day as part of a healthy diet for most adults. Decades of epidemiological research have consistently failed to establish a meaningful link between moderate egg consumption and increased cardiovascular risk in healthy adults. If you have a specific medical condition, particularly familial hypercholesterolemia, this is a conversation to have with your doctor before changing anything. As always, the guidance in this video is educational, not individual medical advice. But for most healthy adults over 60, the decision to avoid eggs for 3 decades may have been the single most significant unintentional reduction in brain protective nutrition in their diet. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Margaret, 69 years old, retired nurse, disciplined, health conscious, the kind of person who read ingredient labels and bought whole grain bread because she had been told for 30 years that it was the right thing to do. She came to me with something she described as a slow fading, not forgetting dramatically, not confused, just slower than she used to be. Words took a moment longer to arrive. Following a long conversation required more effort. She had stopped doing the crossword not because she could not do it, but because it had stopped being satisfying. Her breakfast every morning without exception was 2 slices of whole grain toast with low-fat spread, a glass of orange juice, and a cup of tea. Nutritionally tidy, cognitively no choline, no omega-3. A glycemic load that spiked and fell by 9:30 every morning. We changed her breakfast. 2 eggs scrambled with smoked salmon and a handful of spinach. Water or herbal tea instead of orange juice, that is the entire change. 1 meal. Different ingredients. 12 weeks later, Margaret told me she had started doing the crossword again. Not because the fading had completely reversed, but because the words were arriving a little faster. And that was enough to make it satisfying again. Now, why did that particular combination work? Because it addressed all 3 things her brain had been missing. Here is the complete breakfast framework. 3 things your brain needs from its first meal of the day. The first, stable blood glucose. Your brain needs a steady, sustained supply of glucose, not a spike and a crash. Build breakfast around protein, healthy fats, and fiber, not refined carbohydrates eaten alone. Eggs, smoked salmon, full-fat Greek yogurt, a small amount of nuts. Each digests slowly and releases glucose gradually. Your brain stays fueled across the entire morning without the mid-morning fog. If you eat carbohydrates at breakfast, and there is nothing wrong with that, choose low glycemic index options. Oats rather than cornflakes, sourdough or rye rather than white toast, berries rather than orange juice. The difference in glycemic response is significant. The cognitive benefit compounds over years. The second, choline. 2 eggs at breakfast is the simplest, most effective, most evidence-based way to deliver a meaningful portion of your daily choline requirement. 150 milligrams per egg. The adequate intake for adults is between 400 and 550 milligrams daily. 2 eggs before 8 in the morning gets you close to half of that. If eggs are not an option for you, beef liver is the highest food source of choline. Salmon, shrimp, and chicken breast are meaningful contributors. Any of these at breakfast begins to close the gap that 93% of adults are carrying every single day. The third, omega-3 fatty acids. Think of a neuron as a room with doors on every wall. DHA, the omega-3 fatty acid found in fatty fish and eggs, is what keeps those doors flexible. When DHA is low, the doors stiffen. Signals between neurons slow down. Communication, the speed and clarity of thought, degrades gradually, so slowly that most people never notice it happening. A 2025 review published in the journal Nutrients, examining studies from 2014 through 2024, found that omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids have neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory properties consistent with slowing cognitive decline. And a 2023 study found that older adults who eat fatty fish at least 6 times a month perform better on cognitive tests than those who consume it fewer than twice a month. Smoked salmon on scrambled eggs is not just a pleasant breakfast. It is choline, omega-3, protein, and B12 in a single dish. It is stable blood glucose, memory neurotransmission, and neuronal communication, addressed simultaneously. That is what Margaret ate. That is what gave her back the crossword. This week, one change. Replace the toast and juice just 3 mornings with 2 eggs cooked however you prefer and something alongside them that carries omega-3. Smoked salmon, sardines on the side, a handful of walnuts. 3 mornings, that is the experiment. Your brain is not fading, it may simply be hungry for the right things. And now you know exactly what those things are. Now, one more thing. We talked today about choline, blood glucose, and omega-3 at breakfast. But there is a medication that millions of people take every single morning, often at the same table, alongside this very breakfast, that directly impairs your body's ability to absorb B12, one of the most critical nutrients for brain function and memory. It is the most widely prescribed acid reflux medication in the world, and its effect on your brain's nutrient supply begins with the very first dose. B12 deficiency, in its early and moderate stages, produces symptoms clinically very difficult to distinguish from the beginning of cognitive decline. Memory gaps, mental slowing, a fading that no breakfast change will fix if the medication you take alongside breakfast is quietly undoing the work. In my next video, I am going to cover exactly how that depletion happens, the specific tests to request by name, and what to eat to protect yourself, whether you take this medication or love someone who does. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. That one is not optional.